How many are familiar with the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, on Mount Carmel? Elijah told Ahab, said, bring all of the Israelites together, and we're going to have a little show here. And before the show started, we read where Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. I think we struggle sometimes with following God. And Elijah said, you got to make a choice. You got to follow one or the other. And obviously Israel was trying to do both. And my next question would be, how do you follow God? Well, so today, actually I'm going to be out of 1 Kings. We're going to go look at one of Jesus' 12 disciples and see what it meant for him to follow God or to follow Jesus. I'm going to give you a hint of who it is, but I doubt if any of you will guess it. Did you get that? We're going to look at Thomas. We're going to talk about doubts. What kind of doubts do you have? Let's think of non-spiritual doubts. What kind of things do you doubt? Will I have enough money to pay for something? If you have children, will I be able to raise our children to love each other? Working in Awana on Wednesday nights. Will we get through a night without any discipline issues? I doubt it. Maybe it's a bad habit that you're fighting against. Maybe if you're taking care of elderly parents, will they ever stop telling the same story over and over again? You know, we might doubt that's going to happen. But how about spiritual doubts? What kind of things do we spiritually doubt? Have you ever doubted the goodness of God? Have you even doubted there was a God at one point? Do you maybe doubt that God even exists? Maybe, is there really a heaven? Is there really a hell? Will I able to overcome this particular sin that's in my life? Maybe even doubt your salvation. When can doubt be good? When it causes us to check it out, to investigate, to find out? When can it be bad? When it drives us away from God. I think of the 12 disciples, maybe Thomas gets the most bad rap for who he was. I think he's unjustly given a nickname, Doubting Thomas, and I don't think he's really deserving of that. And I really don't think he's too much different than all the other disciples were back at that time. We're going to look at him because there are at least two other instances in which Thomas dealt with the disciples and the Lord. Are you familiar with the other two instances the Bible teaches us about Thomas? So we're going to look at that, and maybe we can learn something from Thomas and dealing with doubt. We do know that Thomas traditionally went on to serve Jesus in India. And there he took the gospel, credited with bringing the gospel to India, and there was martyred for his faith. Supposedly was killed while praying off the Indian Ocean near Bombay. So who was Thomas? Well, we're going to be in the book of John, so if you want to turn to John. When the Bible talks about Thomas, what do they put with his name? Didymus, right? Didymus is a Greek word. Not that I know Greek, but I'm told this. Means the twin. So Thomas was a twin. And there's even some that think maybe his first name really wasn't Thomas. That was maybe like Judas or James, where there was multiple disciples with the same first name. And so he just became known as the twin. Whenever you wanted to talk to him, you'd call him the twin. You know, like the sons of thunder, he was the twin. And that's why when they talk about Thomas, they go Thomas Didymus. His personality, his character. I think we need to understand that if we're going to understand Thomas. John chapter 10, I'm going to start at verse 24. Actually, verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication. It was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So let's picture where Jesus is at right now. He's in Jerusalem. He's there at the temple. Let's go down to verse 30. He's talking in the temple, and verse 30, he says several, verses 25 to 30 says several things, but he ends with, I and my Father are one. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, many good works have I shown unto you from my Father. Which of these works do you stone me? And the Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. So they were upset that he was saying that he and the Father were one, that he was God. Verse 39, it says, therefore they sought again to take him, but he escaped out of their hands. So he got away from them. They wanted to kill him, and he left. And verse 40 says, and he went away again beyond Jordan into the place where John at first baptized, and there he abode. So he got out of the land of Judah around Jerusalem, and probably up by Galilee, somewhere in there, away from the Jews that wanted to kill him. Chapter 11 now talks about Lazarus, and that he was sick and eventually would die. Let's go to verse 7. Mary and Martha had sent people to find Jesus and to bring him back to Lazarus, to Bethany. And Bethany, I understand, is just upon a stone's throw away from Jerusalem, not too far away from Jerusalem. So he's going to go back into Judea, where Lazarus lived. Verse 7, and after that he said to his disciples, let us go again into Judea. And his disciples said unto him, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and thou thither again? Now goest thither again? And so he and the disciples had a little discussion about the need for him to go see Lazarus, even though he was dead, and they didn't quite understand that, what he meant. Verse 14 of chapter 11, then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. In verse 16, then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Notice who Thomas directed his statement to. Did he direct it to Jesus? He directed it to the disciples. Why did he not direct it to Jesus? I think Jesus had made up his mind. He told him plainly, I'm going to go back to Judea, back to the Jews that wanted to stone me. Were the disciples asked to come with Jesus by Martha and Mary? No, the disciples were not asked to come, just Jesus. So they didn't have to go. But Thomas, and what we read here, what he said, he was ready to go. And he was ready. If we get killed, we get killed. What do you think about Thomas's heart at this point? What was his relationship with Jesus like? He was willing to what? Die with Christ. He had an attitude of courage. Hey, let's go back to the enemy. Let's go back to the enemy lines there where our life will be threatened. I would say that he was devoted to Christ. Now, he maybe had a wrong devotion by thinking that Christ was going to bring back an earthly kingdom instead of a spiritual kingdom, but he was devoted to Christ. I would say he was probably a realist, that his life may be at stake, but he's ready to follow Christ, regardless of the cost. Does this maybe give us a different picture or a contrast of what we maybe initially thought of Thomas? You didn't see any of the other disciples ready to go back with Jesus. In fact, they argued why they should not go back. But Thomas said, we're going. If he's going, I'm going with him. We'll die with him. And it was Thomas who exhorted the other disciples to go, regardless of the danger. And we're going to see later that Peter liked at one time boast about following Jesus, but we knew that he failed in his wanting to follow. But it was Thomas who would put his feet to his statements. John chapter 13. Let's turn there. Verse 31, therefore when he was going out, Jesus said, now let's understand where we're at here. We're in the upper room. This is the night of Jesus' arrest. He's there at this Last Supper. We're very familiar with what's going to happen here. Judas leaves. That's what it says, therefore he was gone, that Judas left to betray Jesus. Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. So he's going to start teaching the other 11 disciples some things here. If God be glorified in him, God shall also glorify him in himself, and shall straightway glorify him. Little children, yet a little while I am with you, ye shall seek me. And as I said unto the Jews, whither I go, ye cannot come. So now I say to you. And let's jump down to verse 36. And Simon Peter said unto the Lord, whither goest thou? Jesus answered him, whither I go, thou canst not follow me now, but thou shalt follow me afterwards. Peter said unto him, Lord, why can't I follow thee now? I will lay down my life for thy sake. Jesus answered him, wilt thou lay down thy life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. Jesus is trying to comfort his disciples by telling them, hey, I'm going to be leaving. You can't go with me right now. With him not, neither knoweth him, but ye know him, for he dwell with you, and shall be in you. I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world seeth me no more, but ye see me, because I live, ye shall live also. Chapter 1, that's where I want to go. He says, let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am. He said unto him, Lord, we know not whither thou goest, and how can we know the way? I think Thomas, again, is showing his desire to follow Jesus wherever it takes him. And he wants to know where he's going. And then he said, how can we know the way? We want to get there. We want to know the way. Now, Jesus has been trying to tell them. They haven't quite caught it yet. But what does this tell us about Thomas? Again, I think he's pretty determined. He's going to follow Jesus. And he wants answers now. Where are you going? And I want to go with you. How am I going? You say, I can't go with you. Well, where are you? What's the path? So I can meet you later or get with you later. And when I thought about trying to follow the path to some place, I got reminded several years ago, probably more than several years ago. Barb and I thought we would go down to Turkey Run State Park, have a picnic, and do some hiking. How many have ever been to Turkey Run? Okay. We had the map, looking at the map and looking at the trails. You got the easy, you got the moderate, you got the rugged, and we're looking at things, we better stick with the easy. So we decided to do an easy trail. We got on it, but little did we know that some of the rugged trails connect with the easy trails. And before we knew it, we were on a rugged trail. And my, oh my, we were going through narrow gorges, we were following small streams on slippery rocks, climbing over logs, going up steep cliffs, and beginning to think, are we ever going to get back to where we wanted to go? I sure wish I had known the way or had a guide to help me get back on the easy trail. Needless to say, we were so happy when we saw an easy trail sign that took us soon back to that suspension bridge to get us over to our car so that we could just go home. We were exhausted. We were done. But life is sometimes like that, you know. You got rough trails you're not expecting to get on, and you wish you could follow the easy trail, and you wanted to be with Jesus, but something happens along the way, and you kind of get doubts of where you're really going. Look at Jesus' answer to Thomas, verse 6. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. We are all familiar with that verse. Jesus was telling Thomas, don't worry about finding me. You know the way. You know the Father. So you know where I'm going. When you think about this conversation that Thomas and the rest of the disciples are having, you might wonder, well, what does that might mean to me personally? I think it's okay, like Thomas, for us to maybe be confused sometimes and say, Lord, what are you trying to tell me? Where are you trying to lead me? I don't understand. I'm confused. No different than Thomas was. But Thomas wasn't going to let it end there. He was going to try to find out. It's okay to ask questions when you start to doubt some things that are going on in your life. Now let's go to John chapter 20. This is the instance we're most familiar with after Jesus' burial. His crucifixion and burial. Notice verse 1. Mary Magdalene comes early to the sepulchre and sees the stone taken away, and she runs to Simon Peter and to the other disciple and said unto them, they have taken the Lord out of the sepulchre. We do not know where they have laid him. Does Mary Magdalene believe in the resurrection at this point? No, she does not. She's thinking, well, they took his body somewhere and they laid him somewhere. Peter therefore came and the other disciple, and they both ran to the sepulchre. We see in verse 6, Peter went into the sepulchre, and of course the body was not there. Verse 8, it says, then went in also the other disciple, which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. Now what did he believe? Did he believe in the resurrection? No, he just believed that the body was gone. That's all he believed in. Verse 10, it says, well, verse 9, it says, for yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again unto their own home. Then we go down to verse 19. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you. Yeah, I guess if he was to come in like that to them, they needed some peace at that point. And when he had so said, he showed them his hands and his side. Then were the disciples glad when they saw the Lord. When did the disciples believe in Jesus' resurrection? When they what? Saw the Lord. They saw his hands. They saw his side. Verse 24. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. Now, Thomas wasn't there at this point. Did this mean he abandoned his faith? Well, if we read on, we're going to see, no, he did not abandon his faith. It says in verse 25, the other disciples therefore said unto him, so they must have saw him afterwards. Thomas came to them some other time later and saw them. He says, we have seen the Lord, but he said unto them, except I see the nail, the hands, see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. Thomas is one of those, I'll believe it when I see it. And how many of us are just like that? We maybe are told something, and we're told to accept something by faith, but we're more, I'll believe it when I see it. And that really is no different than Peter, no different than John, and all the other disciples. They doubted too until they saw the Lord. Verse 26, after 8 days again, his disciples were with him and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors were shut, and then stood in the midst of them and said, Peace be unto you. Then he said to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands. Reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. Jesus came and he offered Thomas the proof that he needed. And what was Thomas' response? Just seeing you, Lord, is enough. I don't need to put my fingers into your palm. I don't need to put my hand into your side. Just seeing you is enough to convince me. Verse 28, Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. Thomas, in the Gospels, all the Gospels, Thomas is the only one to address Jesus as God at this point right here. No one else. Peter addressed Jesus as the Son of God, but Thomas is the only one at this point that called him my God, meaning he accepted him as also the Father. There was no doubt at this point left in Thomas's mind. So I want us to think about when we doubt God's will, or we maybe doubt his ways, what can we learn from Thomas and the disciples? We would all say, well, we're no disciple. We're not like those men was back then. Well, you know what? Even they had doubts at times in their life, experienced that. We also know that God was willing to address their doubts if they came to him honestly with questions. And then I read this one time, and I like what it says, our faith is not based upon our ability to believe, but solely on the fact of Jesus' resurrection. When did the disciples' doubt leave? When they saw Jesus. And what about Jesus at that point? He was the resurrected Jesus. What kind of doubts do you struggle with? I was thinking something we can learn from Thomas. Jesus knows our doubts. Jesus does not reject us because we have doubts. Jesus is willing to and able to help us deal with our doubts when we bring them to him. And we just need to be as bold as Thomas was in confronting Jesus with those doubts. What about the Apostle Paul? Did he ever doubt Jesus as the resurrected Christ? Until when? Until he saw him on the road to Damascus. So when you struggle with doubt, reminded of a situation happened in Matthew. If you want to turn to the book of Mark, verse 9, chapter 9. That would help first, chapter 9. Starting in verse 14, talks about the powerlessness of the disciples. Verse 17, and one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit, whereas he taketh him, he teareth him, and foamed, and gnashed with his teeth, and pined away. And I spake to thy disciples, and they should not cast him out, that they should cast him out, and they could not. Verse 21, he asked the father, said, How long ago since this came unto him, unto the child? And he said, Since he was a child. Oftentimes it had cast him into the fire, into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. I think help my doubts that I'm having, but I want to believe. I want to have that faith. I think we need to do the same. We need to cry out to God during those times when we struggle spiritually with doubts, whatever they might be. It's funny how the Lord brings things to your mind. As I'm getting ready for church tonight, I was thinking about doubts that we have. And how many of you ever doubt about your ministry for the Lord? Is it really doing any good? Is it really worth whatever you're doing? You know, as working in Awana, or maybe you're an Awana leader, is this really worth all the time and effort and work and what we put up with for these kids? And then a song came to my mind. It will be worth it all when we see Jesus. We have the resurrected Jesus. Let's turn our hearts to him and help us during times of doubt. All right, let me close in prayer. Lord, I thank you for your word. You give us many individuals in the Bible to help show us and guide us and teach us. I pray, Lord, that we would use the example of Thomas when we have those times of doubt, that we can turn to the kind of guy that he was, that when he saw you, those doubts went away. Bless the rest of this time today, and we ask in thy name, amen.